Watch. A typical Wednesday night. A college student is heading home after a party. He calls his father. "I drove into a ditch. Come get me." He mentions seeing city lights nearby and says everything is under control. His father heads out immediately, driving to the place his son describes. But when he arrives, there is nothing. No car, no person. The son continues on foot, speaking with his father for 47 minutes. He describes a bridge, the sound of water, distant lights. They try to find each other by following the sound of their voices. Then suddenly, one phrase. "These are my last words." Total surprise, then silence. The phone remains active, but there is no sound. What did he see in that moment? What could have stopped him in the middle of the road on May 14th, 2008? Lincoln County, located in southwestern Minnesota, was a typical region of the American Midwest. It covered an area of 537 square miles with a population of 6,000 people, less than 4 people per square mile. Geographically, the county consisted of perfectly flat terrain with small rises no higher than 50 feet. The landscape was made up of farmland, divided by a grid of straight roads running along property lines. The road infrastructure included several state highways and a network of dirt roads. Most rural roads lacked lighting, clear markings, or guardrails. At night, visibility was limited to car headlights. Cell service in 2008 was unstable in rural areas. Coverage relied on a limited number of towers, leaving many dead zones between them. Weather conditions on May 14th were favorable. The temperature was 10 degrees Celsius, the sky was clear, the wind was light, and there was no precipitation. Visibility was good for nighttime driving. The Yellow Medicine River flowed through the northern part of the county, forming several bends and marshy areas. The river was crossed by several bridges on both major and minor roads. Brandon Victor Swanson was born January 28, 1989, in Marshall, Minnesota. His parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, were a typical Midwest middle-class family in May 2008. Brandon was 19 years old. His physical characteristics: height, 175 centimeters, weight, 73 kilograms, brown hair, brown eyes. He graduated from Marshall High School in 2007 with average grades. Brandon had no disciplinary issues or legal trouble during his school years. At the time of his disappearance, Brandon was a second-year student at Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby, studying veterinary medicine. His academic performance was above average. He had been driving for 3 years with no serious violations or accidents. Brandon drove a 2004 green Honda Civic, purchased by his parents. Family and friends described Brandon as a responsible, reliable young man, not prone to risky behavior or alcohol abuse. It is important to understand the technological context of 2008. GPS navigation for civilian use existed, but was not widespread. Smartphones with GPS maps were just appearing on the market. The iPhone had been released in 2007, but GPS navigation was still basic. Most people relied on local knowledge or paper maps. Car GPS units cost several $100s and were not available to every middle-class family. Brandon's car did not have a GPS device. Mobile phones had limited location capability. The 911 system could estimate coordinates using cell towers, but with only rough accuracy within several miles. Real-time location tracking, now standard in smartphones, did not exist. Families could not electronically track the movements of their members. Social networks were just starting out. Facebook existed, but had no location check-in or emergency alert features. May 14th was a Wednesday, a regular school day at the college. Brandon was at home in Marshall and planned to return to his dormitory by Thursday. During the day, Brandon spent time with friends in Marshall, discussing plans for the summer break. Nothing unusual or any conflicts were reported that day. In the evening, Brandon heard about a student party in Canby and decided to join. He informed his parents about his plans and when he expected to return. Around 8 o'clock, Brandon left his house in Marshall and headed to Canby. The route was 30 miles across familiar roads that he drove often. The party took place in a private house with about 15 to 20 students present. The atmosphere was relaxed. There was alcohol, but only in moderate amounts. Witnesses described Brandon as having had a little to drink, but he was still able to drive safely. His behavior was normal, with no signs of intoxication or aggression. Near midnight, Brandon decided to leave the party and return home to Marshall, motivated by a desire to get enough sleep before classes on Thursday. His friends confirmed he appeared sober and fit to drive at the time of departure. No one expressed concern about his condition or his ability to get home safely. He was last seen getting into his car and heading west from the house. The time he left is estimated between midnight and 12:30. His planned route was to take State Highway 68 west, then Highway 23 north to Marshall, a total distance of 30 miles, with an estimated driving time of 40 minutes. Road conditions were favorable: dry pavement, good visibility, and little night traffic. Weather presented no extra risks. Reports showed stable conditions with no rain, fog, or high winds that could have affected driving safety. There was a delay of 24 minutes between when Brandon left Canby and his first phone call home. The first call was logged at 1:54 a.m. on May 15th. Under normal conditions, Brandon should have arrived home between 1:10 and 1:30 a.m. A delay of about 24 minutes indicated a deviation from the planned route. Possible reasons for the delay included a wrong turn, a stop for personal reasons, a mechanical issue, or a traffic accident. Phone records show that between leaving Canby and his emergency call, Brandon made or received no other calls. Analysis of cell tower locations indicated he was moving generally from Canby toward Marshall, but his exact route remains unknown. The last activity from his phone before the emergency call was recorded at 1:44 in the area between Canby and Marshall. At 1:54 a.m. on May 15, 2008, phone records show an incoming call to Brandon Swanson's number from the mobile phone of his son Brandon. This call began a 47-minute conversation, which became the sole source of information about the young man's final hours. Brandon Swanson had been sleeping at his home in Marshall when the call came in. According to his police statement, his son's voice sounded calm, but carried a hint of irritation and frustration. Brandon told his father that his car had driven into a roadside ditch and was stuck. He explained that he could not get out by himself because of the soft ground, and he asked for help. Brandon's initial description of his location placed him on the road between Marshall and the town of Lind, matching the logical route home from Canby. Bryan immediately agreed to help and began preparing to leave. He woke his wife, Annette, and informed her of the situation with their son. Analysis of the phone records shows that the call quality was good at the start of the conversation, indicating Brandon was in an area with strong cell signal reception. From the beginning of their call, however, Brandon's statements about his location included contradictory details. He said he could see the lights of Lind and believed he was about a mile away. His description included typical features of rural roads, a straight road, ditches on both sides, and farmland. These characteristics matched thousands of miles of roadway across the region. Bryan, who knew the area well, drove out from Marshall toward Lind at around 2:10 a.m. The distance was about 10 miles along a straight road. When he arrived in the area Brandon described, he could find neither his son's car nor Brandon himself. He drove the stretch between Marshall and Lind twice, carefully checking the roadsides. Efforts to coordinate their locations by phone were unsuccessful. Brandon insisted he was describing his position correctly, but their searches did not confirm his words. Around 2:30 a.m., Brandon unexpectedly changed his report, saying he was near the town of Porter rather than Lind. Porter was in the opposite direction from Lind. The sudden change in Brandon's reported location from Lynn to Porter added further confusion. The distance between these towns is about 20 miles, in opposite directions from Marshall. Brian had to change his search route and drive toward Porter, adding 20 minutes to the total search time and increasing frustration on both sides. Searches around Porter also yielded no results. Brian drove every road within several miles but found no trace of his son or his car. Navigation experts suggest several possible explanations for Brandon's conflicting statements. Disorientation caused by alcohol, stress from the accident, fatigue, or mistaking visual landmarks. Psychologists note that in stressful situations, people often misjudge distances and directions, especially at night in unfamiliar or rarely traveled areas. The most likely explanation for Brandon's error is that he mistook lights on farm buildings or other structures for city lights. Around 2:40 a.m., after unsuccessful attempts to meet, a decision was made that Brandon would leave his car and walk toward the lights he saw. The plan was for Brandon to walk to the supposed town while Brian would drive to meet him. Theoretically, this would increase the chances of their meeting. Brandon left his car stuck in the ditch and began walking, staying on the phone with his father. He described the surrounding area as he walked. His initial descriptions included typical rural landscape elements, straight roads, fields, ditches, and occasional farm buildings in the distance. Brandon's walking pace was normal for a flat road. He did not complain of fatigue or discomfort during the first 20 minutes of walking. Weather conditions were suitable for walking. A temperature of 10 degrees Celsius, no precipitation, and light wind. Brandon's clothing was appropriate for a brief time outdoors. To determine their relative locations, father and son tried using sound signals. Brian honked his car horn, and Brandon was to respond if he heard it. In quiet rural areas, a car horn can travel up to 5 miles under favorable atmospheric conditions. Their attempts at sound coordination failed. Brandon did not hear his father's horn, and Brian did not hear his son's calls, indicating a significant distance between them. The failure of sound signals confirmed that their initial location estimates were incorrect. The actual distance between father and son was several miles. Acoustic experts explain that although sound can travel far in flat Minnesota terrain, features like land relief, vegetation, and atmospheric conditions can create sound shadows. It is possible Brandon was in a low area or behind an obstacle blocking the sound, explaining the failed coordination attempts. An important element of Brandon's statements was his mention of a bridge over water. Around 2:55 a.m., he said he was approaching a bridge and could hear running water. His description matched a small bridge over a creek or river, confirmed by the sound of water. Brandon confirmed he was crossing the bridge and continued to hear water. The area Brandon indicated contained several bridges over various waterways, including the Yellow Medicine River, Spring Creek, Flat Creek, and others. Brian used the information about the bridge to adjust his search area. He headed toward the bridge over the Yellow Medicine River as the most likely location. Searches near the bridge over the Yellow Medicine River yielded no results. Brian could hear the sound of water, similar to what his son described, but did not find Brandon. Hydrological data shows that in spring 2008, water levels in the region's rivers were higher than usual due to snowmelt, which could have made the sound of flowing water louder. During the call, cell phone signal quality deteriorated periodically. Around 3:25 a.m., the connection became patchy, with intermittent signal loss. The communication issues might have been caused by Brandon moving into an area with poor reception or atmospheric conditions affecting radio wave transmission. Cellular engineers note that significant dead zones existed in rural Minnesota, especially in low-lying areas and near bodies of water. Signal problems added stress to both father and son and complicated the coordination of the search. Periods of lost contact lasted from a few seconds up to a minute. Brian repeatedly asked Brandon to maintain contact and to call back immediately if the connection dropped. Brandon acknowledged the importance of staying in touch. The last messages confirmed that Brandon was still walking down the road toward the visible lights. By 3:25 a.m., both men showed signs of physical and emotional exhaustion. Brandon had been walking for more than 45 minutes, and Brian had driven over 70 miles. Brandon's voice showed fatigue but remained coherent and oriented. He did not report any serious discomfort or health problems. Brian expressed growing frustration about the inability to find his son despite detailed instructions and multiple coordination attempts. Physically, Brandon was assessed as capable of continuing to walk. The air temperature did not pose an immediate risk of hypothermia. Psychologically, both were stressed, but showed no signs of panic or irrational behavior. The final minutes of their conversation were relatively calm, with mutual assurances to continue the search until they met. Throughout the entire 47-minute phone call, Brandon repeatedly referred to the lights he saw ahead on his route. These lights became the key element of his navigation efforts and the basis for determining the direction of his movement. Brian told police that his son described the lights as city or street lighting. Brandon was confident he was heading toward a populated area. Analysis of lighting in the region shows limited light sources in rural areas. The towns of Lind and Porter had minimal street lighting due to their small size. Alternative light sources could have been farm buildings, grain elevators, industrial facilities, or light reflections from more distant towns under certain atmospheric conditions. Optical illusion experts explain that in flat terrain, isolated bright lights can appear closer and larger than they really are. The false horizon phenomenon in darkness can lead to misjudgment of distance to the light sources, especially without intermediate reference points. A key issue in Brandon's statements was his repeated claim that the lights were close. Yet despite prolonged walking, he did not noticeably approach them. Perception psychology explains this as a distortion in distance estimation under limited visibility. The human brain struggles to judge distance to isolated light sources at night. In flat Minnesota landscape, lights can be visible up to 15 to 20 miles away in clear weather. A person can walk for hours without noticeably getting closer to the target. Brandon may have been seeing the lights of the town of Marshall, located 10 to 15 miles from his presumed location. Marshall was a sizable town with noticeable light pollution. Other possible sources of light included Highway 23, the region's main transport artery with truck traffic at night. The phenomenon of the ever-receding lights is well documented in survival literature and can lead to fatal navigation errors. Topographic maps of the region show an almost perfectly flat landscape with minimal elevation changes. Maximum elevation differences do not exceed 30 to 40 feet over several miles. The main topographic features are drainage ditches, small creeks, and their floodplains. Vegetation is concentrated along waterways in narrow strips of forest. The road network follows a strict grid pattern based on land parcels spaced 1 mile apart. The roads are oriented strictly along cardinal directions, north-south and east-west. This regular grid creates the illusion of simple navigation, but at night all roads look the same, and the lack of distinctive landmarks makes it difficult to determine location. Spring conditions in 2008 included partially flooded lowlands due to snowmelt, which may have altered the usual landscape appearance. The agricultural fields in May were not yet planted, presenting open spaces of dark soil without vegetation. During the call, Brandon provided several specific landmark descriptions that investigators later used to attempt to determine his route. His mention of a bridge became a key element. Brandon described crossing a bridge with running water below, indicating a crossing over one of the region's waterways. Characteristics of the bridge included the audible sound of flowing water, consistent with spring conditions when water levels in rivers and streams were elevated. The region had several dozen bridges over various waterways. The primary candidates were bridges over the Yellow Medicine River and its tributaries. Brandon also mentioned changes in road surface quality, noting areas with loose gravel and potholes. These matched the characteristics of secondary rural roads. His description of vegetation included mentions of trees and shrubs, indicating proximity to waterways or forested strips. Brandon's movement timeline can be reconstructed based on timestamps from the phone call and his progress descriptions. His walking began around 2:40 a.m. and continued until approximately 3:45 a.m., totaling about 1 hour and 5 minutes of continuous walking. At an average walking pace of 3 miles per hour, Brandon could have covered up to 3.5 miles. This distance could be less due to pauses during calls. According to his statements, his direction of travel remained steady toward the visible lights. Brandon did not report significant changes in direction or turns. The edited English voiceover text for the provided segment is ready. Marshall was a sizable town with noticeable light pollution. Other possible sources of light included Highway 23, the region's main transport artery, with truck traffic at night. The phenomenon of ever-receding lights is well documented in survival literature and can cause fatal navigation errors. Topographic maps show an almost perfectly flat landscape with minimal elevation changes, rarely exceeding 30 to 40 feet over several miles. Major features include drainage ditches, small creeks, and floodplains, with vegetation concentrated along waterways in narrow forest strips. The road network forms a strict grid, with roads spaced 1 mile apart, oriented strictly north-south and east-west. This grid creates an illusion of simple navigation, but at night, all roads appear identical, and the lack of distinctive landmarks complicates location identification. Spring conditions in 2008 included partially flooded lowlands due to snowmelt, altering the usual terrain. Agricultural fields were unplanted, presenting open, dark soil without vegetation. During the call, Brandon gave several specific landmark descriptions later used to track his route. His mention of a bridge was key. He described crossing a bridge over running water, consistent with Spring's elevated river and stream levels. The region had several dozen bridges, with the Yellow Medicine River and its tributaries as primary candidates. Brandon also noted changes in road surface quality, such as gravel and potholes, typical of secondary rural roads. He described vegetation, including trees and shrubs, near waterways or forest strips. Based on phone timestamps and his descriptions, his walk started around 2:40 a.m., continuing until about 3:45 a.m., approximately 1 hour and 5 minutes. At an average walking speed of 3 miles per hour, he could have covered up to 3.5 miles, possibly less, due to pauses. Brandon's direction remained steady toward the visible lights without reported significant turns or changes. If Brandon moved in a straight line, he could have traveled up to 4 miles from the crash site toward the supposed town. His failure to get closer to the lights suggests either the light source was much farther than he estimated, or he was moving in the wrong direction. Meanwhile, his father Brian conducted active searches by car, driving over 80 miles across various roads in the region. Brian's search strategy included checking several possible locations: the vicinity of Lind, the area around Porter, and the bridge over the Yellow Medicine River. The failure to meet indicates a fundamental error in determining Brandon's location, or that he was outside the areas covered by Brian's search. Brian focused on main roads and known landmarks, which could have caused him to miss secondary roads where Brandon might have traveled. The time intervals between Brandon's location reports and Brian's arrival ranged from 15 to 30 minutes. Theoretically enough time for a meeting. The lack of visual contact during the searches suggests they were in different areas, or that obstacles blocked their view of each other. Witness testimony from the party confirms Brandon consumed a moderate amount of alcohol. Witnesses described him as slightly intoxicated, but fit to drive. Research on alcohol's effects on cognitive functions shows that even small amounts can impair spatial orientation and decision-making. A blood alcohol concentration of 0.08% or less may not affect driving ability, but can degrade navigation skills in stressful situations. The stress from the accident likely intensified alcohol's impact on Brandon's ability to accurately judge location and distance. The combination of alcohol, fatigue, and stress might have caused disorientation, explaining his conflicting location reports. Medical experts note that physical activity like walking can temporarily improve mental clarity, but alcohol's overall effects persist for several hours. Cell tower records indicate the use of towers in the area between Canby and Marshall during the conversation. The sequence of tower connections provides an approximate trajectory of Brandon's movement. The 2008 cellular network had limited tower density in rural regions. Coverage areas for individual towers ranged from 3 to 15 miles, depending on topography. Switching between towers during the call indicates Brandon was generally moving from southeast to northwest, consistent with traveling from Canby to Marshall. Signal strength gradually decreased during the call, which may indicate movement toward the edge of coverage or into areas where radio waves were obstructed. Cellular engineers note that lowlands, forest strips, and proximity to water bodies could create weak signal zones. The last recorded connection was to a tower serving an area northeast of Marshall, inconsistent with the presumed locations near Lind or Porter. Analysis of Brandon's voice tone and speech in the final minutes shows increasing fatigue while maintaining coherence. He showed no signs of panic, aggression, or irrational behavior. His responses remained logical and appropriate to questions asked. Physical exhaustion from walking an hour at a temperature of 10 degrees Celsius posed no serious threat to a healthy 19-year-old man. Frustration from failing to meet his father was audible in his tone, but did not reach the level that might cause irrational actions. Brandon continued to cooperate, following his father's instructions for coordinating their meeting. He did not report physical discomfort, cold, or other problems, indicating satisfactory health toward the end of the call. The final phase of the conversation, immediately before the dramatic ending, was relatively calm and involved continued coordination efforts. Brandon confirmed he was still moving toward the visible lights. He described his progress as slow but steady. Cell signal quality remained adequate for the call, though occasional brief interference occurred. His last descriptions of the surroundings mentioned no new landmarks or changes in the landscape. Brandon did not report seeing other people, vehicles, or signs of danger in his environment. The tone of the conversation was ordinary, without any sense of impending drama. As the time approached 3:30 a.m., neither father nor son imagined that their routine coordination call would suddenly become their last contact. Brandon continued to express confidence that they would meet soon, either when he reached the lights or when his father adjusted his search route. This atmosphere of normality and mutual cooperation makes the ensuing events even more mysterious and unexplained to those who have studied the case over the following 16 years. At 3:30 a.m. on May 15, 2008, the call between Brandon and Brandon Swanson approached its dramatic conclusion. By this point, the phone call had lasted 1 hour and 36 minutes without interruption. Phone records show stable signal quality in the final minutes of the conversation. Signal strength was sufficient for clear voice transmission, ruling out technical connection failure. According to Brian's police statement, in the last minutes of the call, Brandon continued to describe walking down the road toward the visible lights. His voice sounded tired, but remained coherent. Time analysis shows Brandon had been walking for 1 hour and 5 minutes. At an average pace, he could have covered between 3 and 4 miles from the crash site. Brandon's last coherent messages contained no indication of approaching danger, encounters with other people, or changes in his surroundings. Weather data confirmed stable conditions at 3:30 a.m. Temperature 10 degrees Celsius, clear sky, light wind, no precipitation. Suddenly, at 3:30 a.m., 10 seconds into the conversation, Brandon exclaimed. According to Brian's statement, his son spoke a phrase that became his last words. The exact wording was recorded as an expression of surprise or alarm in English. The tone indicated a sudden event that caught Brandon's attention. Immediately after the exclamation, the phone line was not disconnected. The connection remained active, but Brandon's voice was no longer heard. Brian immediately called his son's name, trying to restore contact. His calls were recorded on the line over the next several minutes. Audio experts found no background sounds that might explain the sudden exclamation. No sounds of struggle, impact, engine noise, or other characteristic noises appeared, excluding many possible explanations. After Brandon's exclamation, the phone line stayed open for 47 seconds. During this time, Brian repeatedly called out but received no reply. Phone records show the call ended at 3:31 a.m. exactly. The disconnection was initiated by Brandon's side, indicating his phone was turned off or lost connection. Technical analysis ruled out battery failure as the cause. Samsung phones from 2008 had up to 4 hours of talk time. The disconnection could have been caused by physical damage to the phone, such as dropping, impact, water damage, or intentional powering off. Brian's immediate attempts to call Brandon after the disconnection were unsuccessful. Calls went to voicemail, indicating Brandon's phone was off. The cellular system logged the last signal from Brandon's phone at 3:31 a.m. through a tower serving an area northeast of Marshall. Brandon Swanson made 17 attempts to reach his son within the next 10 minutes. All failed. Brandon's phone did not respond to incoming calls or show network activity. At 3:45 a.m., Brian decided to contact emergency services. He reached the Lincoln County dispatcher and reported his son missing. The dispatcher's initial reaction was cautious. A 19-year-old adult male was not considered a high-priority case for immediate search operations. Brian insisted on the seriousness of the situation, emphasizing the sudden loss of contact and the unusual circumstances surrounding the disappearance. The official missing person report was filed at 4:15 a.m. on May 15, 2008. After contacting emergency services, Brian continued his independent search for his son. He drove every road in the area where Brandon was believed to be. His search route covered the surroundings of Lind, Porter, the bridge over the Yellow Medicine River, and other locations mentioned during the call. Brian systematically checked all roads, ditches, and visible obstacles within a 15-mile radius of the suspected locations. Special attention was given to finding the Honda Civic Brandon left in the ditch. Locating the car could provide a starting point for foot searches. Brian's independent search continued until dawn, but yielded no results. He found neither his son's car nor any trace of Brandon's presence. At 7 a.m., Brian returned home to coordinate with official search teams and to mobilize help from relatives and friends. Annette Swanson was immediately informed by her husband after contact with their son was lost. She joined the coordination efforts and contacted the extended family. Notifications were sent to Brandon's friends at the university and in Marshall. Many of them quickly offered assistance in the search. Party organizers in Canby were informed to gather additional information about Brandon's condition and plans. Staff at the university in Canby confirmed Brandon had not returned to the dormitory and had not appeared on campus. Medical facilities in the region were alerted in case Brandon sought help or was brought in with injuries. Coordination with the local community began early on May 15th to organize volunteer search groups. Linguistic experts analyzed Brandon's last words to determine possible causes for his sudden exclamation. The tone and intonation indicated surprise or sudden alarm, but not pain or fear. The exclamation was brief and spontaneous. The context did not suggest he was addressing another person. Brandon did not use forms of address or commands that implied others were present. Possible reasons for the exclamation included a sudden obstacle on the road, unexpected terrain change, encounter with an animal, or a technical problem. The absence of additional words or sounds implies the event that caused the exclamation immediately interrupted Brandon's ability to communicate. Behavioral analysts note that the brevity and tone of the exclamation match a reaction to an attack or aggressive actions by others. Cell tower records show the last signal from Brandon's phone was registered by a tower northeast of Marshall. This tower's coverage area extended approximately 8 miles in radius. Exact location within this area could not be determined by 2008 technology. The center of the coverage zone was about 12 miles from Marshall in a direction inconsistent with Brandon's presumed locations near Lind or Porter. This technical data created additional confusion in determining Brandon's actual location at the moment of his disappearance. The coverage area included farmland, several farms, secondary roads, and a section of the Yellow Medicine River. The location of the last signal became crucial in prioritizing search zones during the early days after his disappearance. Brandon Swanson's missing person report was filed at 4:15 a.m. on May 15, 2008, at the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Sheriff Thomas Anderson accepted the report from Brandon Swanson. According to police protocols, the initial assessment classified the case as an adult male temporarily missing. In 2008, county policy did not mandate immediate search operations for adults without signs of coercion. Standard procedure required a 24-hour waiting period before launching official search efforts for adults over 18 years old. Exceptions were made only if there was clear evidence of a crime or emergency. The duty officer considered the sudden termination of the phone call insufficient to classify the case as an emergency. It was assumed the phone might have died, or Brandon could find help on his own. Brandon Swanson insisted on immediate search efforts, emphasizing the unusual circumstances of the disappearance and his son's failure to respond to calls. A compromise decision sent one patrol car to check roads in the presumed area of Brandon's location. Deputy David Richardson was assigned to patrol roads between Marshall, Lind, and Porter, looking for the abandoned car or traces of Brandon Swanson. The search route covered main roads and the most likely crash sites. The patrol traveled slowly enough to inspect shoulders and ditches. Searches were conducted in daylight from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. on May 15th. Weather conditions were favorable for visual detection, clear skies, and good visibility. Deputy Richardson found no sign of Brandon's Honda Civic or any evidence of his presence on the roads checked. All ditches and visible obstacles were examined with no results. The patrol report was filed at 11:30 a.m., concluding no signs of a traffic accident were found in the suspected area. Based on these negative initial search results, the case was classified as a voluntary absence, recommending the family wait for the missing person's return. At 11:47 a.m. on May 15th, farmer Dwayne Hansen discovered an abandoned car in a ditch on County Road 122, about 8 miles northeast of Marshall. The car's location did not correspond to any of the areas mentioned in the phone conversations between Brandon and his father. County Road 122 was a secondary gravel road, rarely used at night. Farmer Hansen reported the discovery to the sheriff's office at 12:10 p.m. The license plates on the car matched the data for the Honda Civic owned by Brandon Swanson. Deputy Sheriff Richardson arrived at the scene at 12:35 p.m. to inspect the vehicle and surrounding area. The car was located in the right ditch of the eastbound road. The front wheels were stuck in soft ground, but the vehicle was not seriously damaged. The keys were missing from the ignition. The doors were unlocked. Brandon's personal belongings, including his wallet and documents, were absent from the car. A forensic examination of the scene was conducted by Detective Donald McGuire at 1:20 p.m. Tire tracks indicated the car left the road at moderate speed, with no signs of hard braking. There were no skid marks or attempts to return to the road. The rut depth in the ditch was approximately 18 inches. The car could have been towed out, but could not drive itself free. Shoe prints around the vehicle matched the size and type of Brandon's footwear. Tracks led eastward from the driver's door along the road. The footprints continued for about a quarter of a mile before ending on solid pavement. No signs of struggle, blood, or foreign tracks were found near the vehicle. The discovery of the car created a serious contradiction with the information provided during the phone call. Brandon claimed to be near Lind or Porter, but the car was found in a completely different area. County Road 122 was 8 miles northeast of Marshall, not consistent with any directions mentioned by Brandon. The distance from the car's location to Lind was 14 miles, and to Porter, 16 miles. Brandon could not see the lights of those towns from that distance. The direction of tracks from the car was east, which did not align with directions to Lind, southwest, or Porter, northwest. Detectives began considering the possibility of Brandon's disorientation or deliberate misleading about his location. An alternative theory proposed Brandon might have left the crash site by hitchhiking and called his father from a different location. After the car's discovery, the sheriff's office immediately initiated a full-scale search operation. The case was reclassified from voluntary absence to disappearance under suspicious circumstances. Additional deputies, volunteer search groups, and tracking dogs from neighboring counties joined the efforts. The initial search area was set within a 5-mile radius from the car's location. Searches focused on foot patrols of roads, fields, and water bodies. A coordination center was established at the Marshall Community Center. The Swanson family actively participated in planning and coordinating the search efforts. By the evening of May 15th, more than 50 people, including professional rescuers and volunteers, were involved in the search. Search groups worked until nightfall without finding traces of Brandon. The discrepancy between Brandon's statements about his location and the car's actual discovery site complicated search planning. Search resources were divided between several areas: the presumed crash site, areas near Lind and Porter, and the bridge over the Yellow Medicine River. Uncertainty about Brandon's direction of movement from the car hindered determination of priority search zones. Time was also a complicating factor. By the time full-scale search efforts began, more than 12 hours had passed since Brandon disappeared. Weather conditions remained stable, which helped the search but increased the likelihood that Brandon had moved far from his initial location. Limited resources in the rural county made it difficult to cover all potentially important areas simultaneously. Subsequent analysis of the initial law enforcement response revealed several critical mistakes that may have affected the outcome of the case. The 24-hour waiting rule for adults was deemed inappropriate for cases with unusual disappearance circumstances. The initial search's limitation to one patrol car was insufficient to cover all possible crash sites in the vast rural area. Focusing the search on main roads resulted in missed secondary roads where the car was actually located. Underestimating the sudden phone call disconnection as an indicator of an emergency was recognized as a serious error. The lack of immediate coordination with cellular providers to determine the last phone location cost valuable time. These mistakes became the foundation for subsequent changes in missing person search protocols in Lincoln County and across Minnesota. Thank you for watching. Please share your thoughts in the comments.